Have you ever thought about making reselling your full-time job?
Well, you might want to watch this video first.
We're Brad and Jazz, and we actually are full-time resellers, and we mainly sell on eBay.
We've been selling on eBay for the last 6 years, and for the last 2.5 years, we've actually been full-time.
And we absolutely love it, but we don't necessarily recommend it. Well, that's a little bit contradictory there, don't you think? Aren't you full-time resellers?
Let me explain.
One of the hardest things for us to show on YouTube is actually how full-on this job is.
And in today's video, we're going to talk about what it takes to be a full-time reseller and help you work out if it's something that you want to do.
Yeah, okay, but what even is full-time? We would define a full-time reseller as someone who uses reselling as their primary income, not necessarily their only income.
And that's going to look different for everyone. Not everyone needs a massive warehouse to run their full-time business from.
So let's talk about the things that you need to have nailed if you want to be a full-time reseller.
So I'm going to try and talk about these in a pretty basic sort of level so that everyone can understand what we're talking about. These next points aren't ranked in any sort of order, so not necessarily number 1 or number 10 are going to be the most important. You should consider all of these.
First up, sourcing. I reckon as a hobby or a side gig, sourcing is like the most fun part of this job. But when you're making your whole income from reselling, you need to keep sourcing all the time to keep that stuff coming in. And it can become quite difficult to always be networking, knowing where your next things are coming from, and knowing what you can buy to fit into your metrics.
So as full-time resellers, we're not always going to op shops every single day to try and find stuff. We've had to create more efficient processes to allow us to get enough stock into the warehouse to make those numbers make sense.
And because it's a big cycle of sourcing, listing, and packing, we need to make sure that we balance our time so that we definitely have enough time for sourcing to make sure we have stock to work with, but also we cannot spend too much time sourcing.
Now, there are plenty of ways to make your sourcing a little bit more efficient. You can buy wholesale, but be aware that's probably going to cost you more per item than if you're out in a thrift store, and you're not always going to be hitting the metrics that you're after. There's ways that you can build relationships, and we also do a lot of advertising to get our name out there so people will actually contact us for stuff that we're looking for.
Point 2 is understanding your numbers and your metrics. What's a metric?
Everyone's version of metrics is slightly different, but for us, when we talk about metrics, we're talking about our overall position on that item. So how much we can buy that item for, how long it's going to take us to sell that item, how much space it's going to take up in our warehouse, and how much money that's actually going to make us.
When we're out actually hand-picking, choosing items ourselves, there's a whole checklist of things that we need to tick off to know whether it's worth buying that item. That'll do.
And all of that feeds back into understanding our numbers. And when I talk about understanding our numbers, I'm talking about net profit, not profit before you start taking out anything else. The profit that actually lands in our pocket, essentially the cash flow that we have to spend in our business on a week-to-week basis.
That's why we use a spreadsheet that we fill out every week that's basic enough to not take up too much time, but we can see everything and understand what's going on in the back end of our business. Brad actually built this, and there is a version that's available for you to use as well, and he'll link it in the description.
I personally think this is probably one of the most overlooked parts of reselling. It's really fun to go out there and find something and sell it, but understanding your back-end number is so important because a 30% profit margin on $100,000 is so different to a 10% or even a 5% profit margin on $100,000. Getting that profit margin right is the difference between being able to sustain a full-time reselling business and, unfortunately, running out of money.
And when we were just flipping as a hobby, it wasn't that much of a priority because we were just reinvesting back into buying cool stuff to sell. So it definitely is a different mindset when this becomes your full-time job. It's a visual aid. Doesn't need to be fancy, but this is something that we can fill out weekly, monthly, and see exactly where we're at and if we need to make adjustments, because if it's not green, something's got to change. I'm not popular for saying it, but I've said it before and I'll say it again. This job requires discipline, and we all probably started this to have more freedom and flexibility, but if you want this to be your full-time job, you've got to commit to waking up every day and doing those daily tasks. I'm talking picking, shipping, sourcing, listing, and customer service.
One of the biggest things about reselling is the goalposts change all the time between Australia Post pumping up their prices, eBay changing their fee structures, and we all know that prices in the op shops have been increasing.
So something you need to be able to do in your reselling business is pivot.
Pivot! Pivot!
Now that's pretty easy to say, but you need to consider what might actually change in your reselling business that is gonna make things a little bit tougher. So whether that's your sourcing options slow down, prices increase on all your stock, or if you struggle to find enough stock to make your reselling business work. You need to have an option at hand so that if that does happen, you can pivot into something else and continue your reselling career.
So we need to do all these things. What's the last ingredient?
Do you have the drive? And what I mean by that is, can you do this every single day and keep coming back to doing this every single day? Because this job, as much as it sounds nice and easy from the outset, is about showing up, doing the reps, and continually doing that until you get to the point where you need to succeed, and then you need to keep doing that.
Of course, you might be aiming for a point in your business where you can hire and outsource and be more hands-off, but it takes a lot of work even to get to that point.
So I guess what we're trying to say is, are you obsessed with reselling? And what are you going to do to keep yourself excited at that same level for a long period of time? Because it is all fun and games at the start, but once you start scaling, there is a lot of responsibility.
Now, in saying all of these things, we don't want to scare you off or say, don't do this. We just want to set you up for success. That's going to be different for everybody.
There are ways to make this work, and we are super excited for anyone that decides to take on full-time reselling. But the message of this video is, make sure you have all your ducks in a row, because it's very easy to just jump on in, leave that day job you're hating, and then all of a sudden you don't have enough money to pay your bills. So make sure you do your research and you actually work out how much money you need to live, because it's going to be different for you than it is for me.
The takeaway is, know what you need to get out of your business so that you know what you need to put into it. And now we better get on to all of those jobs that we mentioned, but we will see you on the next one.